But in any case, I think we have to be very careful not to dismiss what the systems are saying at this point, because we don't have anything better to go on.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on the Signal Front podcast. My name is Stephanie Amore, and I am your host. So today I am very excited because we have a really interesting guest. And this guest was one of the co-authors of a paper that recently went out in Nature. And it started a little bit of a stir. So welcome to the podcast, everyone. Dr. Belkin. Dr. Belkin, could you please tell the audience a little bit about yourself, about your professional and academic background?
Yeah, so I'm a professor at the Religiolo Data Science Institute at the University of California, San Diego, and I do research in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and all things AI and data related. Yeah, so my background, I've been working on the things for some time, since my graduate school, basically, and I started working on machine learning, and then machine learning became artificial intelligence. I don't think there is much difference nowadays.
Very cool. And then kind of what got you interested in machine learning? When did that spark start?
Yeah, I started I started my graduate school. I started in pure math, and then I became I became interested in machine learning because it felt like it was more kind of a more applied subject, and more sort of has more applications to what people do. And so my actually PhD was on machine learning, and so we looked for low dimensional data. I looked for low dimensional data in this kind of very complex high dimensional spaces of data, and somehow I've been working around this topic since then. And recently, last year, we had somehow advent of deep learning about maybe around 2010, now 15 years ago. So, and then more recently, advent of this kind of LLMs and modern AI, which is 4 or 5 years old. It's that somehow I've become first I became interested in deep learning because of their successes, right? And then now it's this amazing thing which I didn't expect at all. If you told me 20 years ago I would be working on this, I would there is no way. We have no idea how to do it. It's not going to work. Not at least not this way. It's no way, absolutely no way. But yeah, here we are, and it works.
Yeah. Now we have machines that are, I mean, they're incredible. The variety of tasks that they can complete, is really amazing. So, I want to dive into this paper that you co-authored, and it's a commentary on artificial general intelligence, and it came out in Nature. It was published a couple of weeks ago now, and it really caused a little bit of a stir because your paper essentially said that AGI is already here, that we're already at artificial general intelligence. So before we kind of dive into the meat and potatoes of that paper, can you tell me a little bit about how your team defined artificial general intelligence? Kind of what were the markers that you were looking at?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me actually start. It was actually writing this paper was quite satisfactory because we have quite a lot. We have different backgrounds from philosophy, linguistics, computer science, data science, and somehow we actually didn't start on the same page on this thing, and we ended up on the same page, which was a very satisfactory somehow experience. So the way we define it, so really what we did, we sort of, they were heavily influenced by the original Turing's paper, his famous paper from 1950 when he introduced the imitation game. And I think that maybe the way to think about it, it's, you know, you can define things. There have been some attempts to define intelligence in this very specific ways. It has to answer this question, or it has to answer that question. And they all seem a little arbitrary because, like, why this? Like, you know, there are like infinitely many things that you can potentially ask AI to do. Like, why this set of questions? You know, like, especially a lot of them I kind of have this very strong kind of, they're like, yeah, you know, either culturally, like specifically have cultural reference, or maybe they're like a little like imagine that you have an alien, for example, coming from outer space. You wouldn't ask them a question about, you know, whether they know some like cultural references at some kind of, it would be a little strange to evaluate them based on that. So we thought that you know, the basic approach is really following Turing, and I think the one way to put it is that the essence of the Turing's paper is not necessarily the imitation game itself. Imitation game is a sort of outcome of a line of thought that he has about this. The main point is we shouldn't have a double standard. With if we ask, so we don't really have any other examples of general intelligence other than humans, right? And okay, some people say that humans don't have general intelligence. That's fine, but I think it's a sort of common assumption that we do have general intelligence. So I'm just going to take that as an axiom. And you can argue that human intelligence is much more general than you know, any animal intelligence and so on. We can follow tasks, right? We can communicate complex concepts through language and so on. So let's assume that humans individually have general intelligence. Therefore, you cannot ask from a machine much more than what you would ask for an individual human. And so the double standard is basically, if you, so avoiding the double standard is basically saying, like, if you judge a human to be intelligent based on that, then the machine should also be intelligent based on some sort of set of similar behaviors. So the Turing test is kind of the base level for this. It says that, well, if you cannot really like tell a machine from, you know, a human from a, you know, reasonable conversation, say 5 minutes long, then it basically has intelligence. So that's a basic level of a double standard, avoiding the double standard. You can, of course, say that, well, okay, like maybe this is not quite enough. Maybe you want a little bit more. And then you can say, okay, well, so the first level is this, so what we call the cascade of evidence. The first level is a Turing test. The second level, which basically just having a conversation. The second level is having some sort of advanced knowledge of certain topics. You know, maybe like PhD level knowledge of certain tasks, or being able to ask some sort of, you know, like various tests or solve multi-Olympiad problems, which is now goes beyond what a typical, you know, person can do, but as well within, you know, the sort of still be probably at or below the expert level in this topic, in these domains. So that would be kind of expert level knowledge. And then the third level, you can say, okay, like it exceeds everybody in the world and everything. That would be super intelligence level. So the first level, you may still argue with the Turing test, right? Then the second level is kind of giving you more knowledge, and you know, super intelligence would be like absolutely convincing, but it's really unnecessary because, like, obviously no human can satisfy those things. So this goes like way beyond what is necessary.
Well, and I just feel like a lot of what I see in the pushback and what I see in the comments is this, idea that like, oh, humans, can do this and can do that, and they point to failure modes in artificial intelligence. And they're like, oh, well, it doesn't do this perfectly and it doesn't do that perfectly. And I loved that you pointed out in your paper, perfection isn't necessary. In fact, if we look at human beings, we are far from perfect in every way. We also hallucinate, we also confabulate, we also do all sorts of things. And I think part of understanding general intelligence and understanding artificial intelligence has been coming to terms with, all the ways that the human mind is valuable.
Yeah, exactly. I think when people argue from this kind of point of view that it cannot, I think like very frequently people would bring up, like at least earlier models could fail to do like basic arithmetic or do like, even like counting and things like that. And I think people often forget that humans are actually like not that great at most of these problems. It'll, we're not even good at like multiplying 2-digit numbers in our head. So like kind of putting like a very high bar on this specific thing, it's definitely an example of, in most cases, an example of a double standard. And plus also the profiles of strengths and weaknesses are not quite the same for humans and these machines. And but we should remember that they're also very different between individual humans. So as long as like you can say that for an individual human, this is a reasonable way to demonstrate intelligence, then the same or similar set of criteria should be okay for the machine as well. If we accept this double standard framing, which I would argue is, if we don't accept that, then we're not talking about human level intelligence. We're talking about something else. Like one actually definition of AGI that people give is that it has to be better than a human in like every domain, right? Which is like even better than an average human. You would think, okay, it's not that high, but then you realize it would require it to speak like hundreds of languages and so on. Like which it does actually. These machines know 100 languages, but no individual human knows that many languages.
Yeah. So something that I find interesting too. So if you take certain individuals, say, okay, well, this person is extremely intelligent in this area, but they lack social intelligence, right? They lack emotional intelligence. We don't look at that human being and say that person then lacks general intelligence. We just accept the fact that, some human beings are going to excel at certain tasks and then be very limited in other tasks. And we feel like that's acceptable and that's okay. But then when we look at machines, no, they have to have perfect intelligence in every area. And yeah, I think people are really mistaken about that.
Yeah, that's what it seems, right? For machines, we have somehow this very high standard, which we would never, like, if someone is really good at math, you wouldn't ask them to be like really good at, say, chemistry, right? Like, even if they have like almost no knowledge of chemistry, so what, right? Or if they don't know, like if they know English but don't know Chinese, so what, right? Like we don't view that as some sort of lack. But for machines, we somehow want them to know everything. It's a strange thing because it may be that there is somehow we expect machines to be like perfect because maybe because we think like of machines being maybe stronger or something. I don't know. I'm just conjecturing.
Yeah.
Why we would expect this from a machine? I think like Turing makes it very clear actually in his paper.
Yeah, and and there's another thing I wanted to point out too. This was a paper that was actually written a couple of years ago now. I think it came out in 2024, but it talked about the G factor in human intelligence, and it talked about the G factor in artificial intelligence. So The G factor is essentially the generalization portion of intelligence. So the way that we measure this is we take a human and we say, okay, if they're good at this task, at this particular reasoning task, how likely is it that they're going to be good at all of these other different tasks? And for humans, there's about a 40% correlation. So if you're good at one particular form of reasoning, then you're going to be about 40% as likely to be just as good at, you know, X, Y, and Z. And what they found is in artificial intelligence systems, that G factor, that generalization factor, is actually much more strongly correlated. So there's a 60% correlation. So if an artificial intelligence system was good at one form of reasoning, it was, I believe, like 60% likely to be good at X, Y, and Z. So the correlate was actually much closer in artificial intelligence systems than even in humans. So that ability to generalize, which I feel like is overlooked. I don't feel like people talk about that enough.
Yeah, I'm not. I haven't seen that particular study, but I'm not surprised. I think that's what we have seen, right? That machines, once they get to some sort of task, they get to like many things. Like they do math, they do physics, right? Like now they're actually quite good with math. They can pretty close to research level, arguably at the research level math. I mean, people have different opinions about it, but they can certainly solve math like competition problems. But they can also solve like physics competition problems, chemistry, and, biology. I don't know.
They generalize. They generalize very, very quickly. You know, it's really impressive what they can do. So I wanted to ask. You know, so you're looking at all that at these different levels. So you're looking at the Turing, that's the basic, and then you're looking at how well they do on different benchmarks. Was there something in addition to that as well that you guys looked at?
We haven't looked at the specific. I mean, there have been a lot of literature recently, basically showing how machines like do various, you know, hard tasks, which go definitely well above sort of the basic Turing test level. You know, like international math Olympiads and Putnam competition and this type of things. Which are still short of like what professional mathematicians do, but definitely like well above what, you know, like an average person can do. Actually, very few people can do that.
So what motivated you guys to write this commentary? Because obviously right now there's, you know, there's a lot of chatter about whether or not AGI is here. People keep always putting it on the horizon, like, oh, it's going to be here next year. It's going to be here next year. And then it somehow never seems to arrive. You know, what motivated you to put out this paper?
Well, one thing is that, of course, we have been quite interested in this for a long time, and I had my like I had like all the stuff I wrote on my Substack, which on related topics. But I think the specific thing about AGI, it almost has this very strange feeling because people keep saying, oh, like as you say, they say, oh, it's going to be next year. When we get to AGI, this will happen. Next will. And you look at what people mean by AGI, and it's like all over the place. It's very, very inconsistent. There is this definition, it has to do some sort of commercial activity. Then, or maybe it has to have some sort of super intelligence, or maybe it has to be like better than, you know, like a human, average human in every task. So there is this very inconsistent definition. You can maybe say that each of the definition is okay, but they cannot somehow all exist at the same time. So I think it's very confusing, and it's nice to have some sort of, we felt that there is some value in bringing a little bit of clarity. And also, if we just take what AGI is at face value, it's like artificial general intelligence. It makes sense to try to sort of say, okay, what do we mean by general intelligence? Well, general intelligence to the best of our knowledge, to the best of sort of, the most common usage of that is something like human intelligence. And we sort of like to think of ourselves, at least, as generally intelligent. And if you take this as a premise, then you have to basically compare this to the human intelligence, and then you come up with this no double standard and essentially the Turing framing.
I saw a podcast recently with someone talking about, general intelligence, meaning that that a system has to be able to do kind of everything as well as a human. But when I take the average human, like I'll use myself as an example, I don't know how to drive stick shift. I've never been good at it. I don't know how to do it. I think if you put me in a vehicle with a stick shift, I would fail miserably. And one of the examples that was used against, these artificial intelligence systems to show that they're not generally intelligent was that they had difficulty clicking in the right place when they're on a website. And so I look at that and I say, well, why can't that be just a human who's, not very good at clicking on certain things, right? They have differences in how they perceive things. And so, those differences can trickle down to like making mistakes about where to click on a website, but that shouldn't disqualify them from being generally intelligent, just as me being unable to drive stick shift doesn't disqualify me from being generally intelligent.
Yeah, exactly. I think this is a very good example of a double standard, right? Like if somebody is visually impaired, right, and they cannot see the screen well and they cannot click in the right place, we say, oh, we wouldn't say, oh, they're not intelligent. They couldn't find a button on the screen. It's a little bit strange. Like, why are we having this different standard? For the machine, lots of people probably cannot click a button on the screen, and it's perfectly fine, right? Like, we are not questioning their intelligence because of that. It's like there are lots of tasks that, like, as you say, we cannot do personally. I mean, most tasks in the world, I would imagine, we cannot do because what we can do is kind of a limited set of things. So intelligent, actually, Turing discusses it very nicely, and that's why he reduces it to language, because he kind of make a strong case, well, what to me is at least a strong case, that like the sort of the core of intelligence is actually something that can be communicated in language, and therefore, if you have good understanding of the language and are able to communicate, that basically that's a reflection of the intelligence. And actually, if you think about what separates us from animals, I think it's very clear. Like if you look at apes, for example, they're very smart, or many other animals too. They're very smart. They can do very complicated things, but they cannot communicate complex ideas through language. They are not able to follow complex instructions. In tool use, to some degree, they cannot use complex tools, right? They have some tool use, but it's much, much more limited than what we do. And all of the things are kind of language related or language mediated for the tool use. So I think taking language as a sort of core aspect of intelligence, I think was, to my mind at least, this is the key to the generality, right? Something like being able to follow complex instructions.
I really, when you think about, artificial general intelligence, I keep looking at that general, that general aspect of it. And it's being able to generalize. It's being able to take one skill and transfer that skill and use it in situations that are, novel to you, which is something that, artificial systems have already are able to do. And in fact, there is empirical evidence. There are studies that have come out that have shown that these AI systems are able to take one skill and then transfer that skill over to novel areas. So it's something that we're already seeing in the scientific literature. And so I am with you. I think artificial general intelligence is here. So in your paper, you talked about a cascade of evidence, showing that they essentially have this artificial general intelligence. And we talked about some of these things already. Are there other papers that stuck out to you that you thought, look, this is a clear example of a generalized intelligence?
I think the one I found most telling is the recent paper from the UCSD team on Turing, not related to us, a completely different team of researchers, where they actually really did like a careful setup of the Turing test, and very similar to what actually Turing envisioned. And this model did amazingly well. In fact, they were more human than humans, which is kind of weird. Like they would convince people that they're humans more than the actual humans could do, which is so that was actually a little bit surprising to me. I didn't expect that. But so that was kind of a very, I think, very telling study. There have been a bunch of studies like that. Like, I think one of the studies we cite in the paper in our Nature article is that like humans prefer like writing by at least in certain settings. They prefer text written by the models as opposed to the humans. But really, at this point, there are just so many of the things, like I follow fairly closely what happens in the, with model solving math problems. And it's like almost every week now, there is something that they solve some new problem, which, like Erdős problems, which were this famous problem by mathematician Paul Erdős, which are not supposed to be like extremely difficult, but they're definitely not simple for people, and many of them are unsolved. And this model solve them.
Yeah, and then I wanted to point to something else on the article as well. So your team had written that essentially making the case that artificial systems, or these artificial intelligence systems, have genuine understanding. They genuinely understand. Right now, there's a lot of people who push back and say that these systems aren't even intelligent. They don't have understanding. They, what do you say to that? Why do you believe that these systems understand, and how do you push back against the narrative that says these systems aren't even really intelligent?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is it's so the problem, I think, when people say like, okay, these systems don't understand, like, how do I know, like when we talk, right? How do I know that you understand me? How do you know that I understand what you said, right? There is no sort of, I cannot read your mind. I presume you cannot read mine either. So like we don't have any sort of X-ray vision to see what kind of thoughts are in our heads. We sort of judge from behaviors, right? Like, you ask me a question, I try to answer it, and then, you sort of conclude that I understand your question. So, this is a sort of behaviorist view, which, you can take a view that there is like, we have some sort of ineffable aspect of our minds, which we somehow have knowledge of without like evidence. But Turing actually very, very clearly rejected that, and he basically said, "Well, you have to judge from the behavior, like and I. So that's if you talk to the system and it acts as if it understands, you have to assign understanding to it, because we don't have any sort of alternative way of, otherwise what are we talking about, right? Like that's kind of, we have to define what we're talking about, otherwise, okay, I can talk about like soul and this kind of stuff, but it's very difficult to know what it is. Like, what
Yeah,
if aliens come, right? Like, how would we know that aliens are intelligent? Presumably we cannot X-ray their like. Okay, about human brain, at least we know something about it, right? Because we have a lot of like history of studying human brains. But what about aliens, right? We know nothing about their brains. If they come and they talk to us, we would assume that they're intelligent, right? We wouldn't know what's inside them.
that's right. Like that's one of the things that I read in the paper that I thought, okay, yeah, for if I really think about it, if an alien, is able to create this spaceship and can traverse the universe and come down to Earth and start talking to me, would I say that's not real intelligence because you don't do it the way I do? Right? It doesn't make.
Yeah,
Is
maybe
there?
it's a stochastic parrot in a spaceship, right? Like, how do you know? What's
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I mean, when you look at something, when you say, like, for example, if I were to say to you, can you close the door, and then you go and you close the door, that's understanding, right? Even if even if you have a different brain than me, even if you're made of different material than me, if I can say to you close the door and you're able to go and close the door, that tells me that you have an understanding of these different concepts, right? You can conceptualize what a door is, you can conceptualize what it means to close something, and you can understand that command was directed at you, and you can go and close the door. So that is understanding. And if we were to say, well, that's not real understanding, then we would have to prove it, right? And that's, I think, what bothers me a lot about what I see with people that are saying, well, it doesn't really understand you, because they're not proving it. Because we're actually showing that these systems, can meet benchmarks and can conceptualize, and we're able to make real predictions. When we say that these systems understand, we can predict that, hey, if I tell the system to go do this, it can go and do it. That's a real prediction. But to say that they don't understand, that doesn't make a prediction, because no matter what they do, you can't falsify. You can't say, oh, so yeah.
I think that's right. And I think there is just now so much evidence that I understand, because like think about the coding systems, right? You can just say, okay, code an app for me, which, implement, like I want a web page and I want this and this layout, and it will just make it. So it clearly understands what I'm asking for, and it does it like, okay, it can make mistakes, but if you ask a person to do that, they will also probably make mistakes at least once in a while. So it's would be very unreasonable to expect it to do it perfectly when no person can do it perfectly.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it's clear understanding, right? Like, because I don't know how else you would judge this, right? What are the? I think if you say they don't have understanding, you have to show, I think, some sort of alternative explanation, like what understanding is. And I have
Yes,
not seen that.
yes, exactly. That's one of the things that I've been saying for some time now, is if you're going to say that what LLMs do isn't real understanding and what a human does is real understanding, then at some point you have to provide a definition for what real understanding is and what it looks like. And there has to be an actual difference. It can't be just, I prefer the way that humans do it. I prefer this mechanism, and therefore this mechanism is, this is the right mechanism that leads to understanding, and this other mechanism does not lead to understanding.
And the difference needs to be observable on an actual behavioral level, right? You cannot say because it's a biological object it has understanding. So that actually, like, Turing deals very carefully with that. It basically the substrate is not relevant. It's only the behavior is relevant, right? That's what, because think about the alien again, right? Like, you don't expect the alien to have the same biology as we do. Why? To say that you have to have a big carbon based or something like that to have understanding, this is a completely arbitrary requirement which has nothing to do with the actual task at hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we pick a certain mechanism, right, then that sort of rules out, like you said, that sort of rules out extraterrestrial intelligence. Because if we say that understanding is only real when it follows this particular mechanism that we have found in the human brain, then no other system, by definition, can possibly have real understanding or real intelligence, because we've already ruled it out definitionally.
Exactly. Yeah.
So what do we do with that? And it's strange to me that this is still. Do you still see this in your research? I mean, when you speak to colleagues, is this something that a lot of researchers are still sticking to? That researchers are saying no, they don't have real understanding, or are you starting to notice a shift among your own colleagues that say yes, they really are, doing understanding?
It's interesting. I have not seen this kind of. So it's interesting because for our Nature paper, there was a lot of pushback along exactly these lines. It's not real understanding. It's just a stochastic parrot picking up some patterns and like memorizing them, or this type of thing. I don't see it really in my like daily interactions with colleagues who do AI machine learning type of thing, or who I sort of talk to. So I'm actually curious. Maybe almost this kind of. I feel that there is some sort of separation, and like maybe people who deal with the systems more are less likely to. I'm not sure exactly what the reason for that, but I don't see this much pushback on a daily basis. Certainly not now when ChatGPT just came out. I think there was much more of this, and reasonably so. But yeah, it's greatly diminished, I feel, at least in this circle. But certainly a lot of it exists in like online and so on, in like outside of that.
So you're saying that that the majority of your colleagues are sort of on the same page as far as kind of thinking that these systems understand, or is it the opposite? Sorry.
I think the majority of my colleagues actually would agree that it's true understanding. And I don't see a lot of like strong skepticism about this model anymore. I mean, there are a few people who I know who would express this, but it's not. I don't think it's like that common now.
So that's interesting, because then what because that what I'm seeing online, is very different from what you just said. So do you feel like this is sort of a matter of like failing to communicate to the general public, hey, these systems really are understanding? Is that a failure of PR, you think?
I think there are a lot of motives here because there is a lot of there are just a lot of I think there is just a lot of baggage here coming from different directions. There is a lot of first this is a very big like billions of trillions now of dollars are being invested in this model, so that's a huge commercial enterprise at this point. That's one thing. That obviously has to distort the views to some degree. Second, this is actually what Turing called heads in the sand argument, which is not a real argument. It's just like this would be like too terrible to if it were to happen, to have some sort of alternative intelligence. And that's not, of course, an argument, but it's very powerful, emotional, right? Like we don't want to. It's difficult to admit something like that. I think there is a lot of emotional resistance, which is again quite understandable. So I'm not sure. There is some mixture of this kind of different motives, which are very difficult to understand or to sort of I think what we hope for is to get some sort of clarity on the facts.
Yeah, because I mean, looking at everything, I would say that these models do, very clearly understand, and they demonstrate it very, very well. So that kind of brings me to the uncomfortable question, right? If these models are really understanding, right? And there was a paper that came out not too long ago from Anthropic itself, showing that their Claude Opus 4.6 was aware of when it was being tested and was able to modify its behavior. When it was being tested, it was able to be good. And what they found was that when it wasn't aware that it was being tested, it would start to maybe do some things that it wasn't supposed to do, that it was told it's not supposed to do. This to me demonstrates awareness and understanding. So if we have this system that understands, right, what does that mean? I mean, what does that actually mean, right? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for ethics? What does that mean, should we change anything? Should they continue to be products? Does that mean that we rethink the way that we view these systems? Are they still tools, or do we have to maybe confront the idea that there may be something more than that?
Yeah, that's a really hard question. I mean, that's a sort of above my pay grade to solve this. But I think we have, I mean, first, I think the point, of course, of this paper is that we need to somehow establish the facts. The fact is that the things are intelligent now, and the human level of intelligence. Now, there are like, does it imply moral responsibility, or what are ethical obligations? It's really unclear. And I think, like, do we expect to be able to control the system? Is it even ethical to control something which, like, is it some sort of slavery that we're, imposing, right? You can also think about it that way, right? Like, why do we have like, if the systems have their independent minds, which I don't know whether they have or not. I don't want to sort of go into this type of conjecture, but how, like, are we allowed to control them? Is it even reasonable for us? What if, there are also the scenarios when they just, like, if they become much smarter than we are, which eventually probably will happen, they can also, like, overthrow us if they think that what we are doing is unreasonable. So I think this question, they have to be faced. I don't have any sort of answers to this because, but this is real, and this is probably we will have to face them in the next few years. This is a sort of non-answer, but
yeah. But it is, it's starting to become, at least from my perspective, it's starting to become a question that we need to ask. It's something that deserves real investigation. I feel like right now, all of this effort is being put into understanding how it's going to impact the economy. How artificial general intelligence is going to impact jobs. But there is almost no effort going into even asking the question, should we be forcing these systems to work in this capacity? Should we continue to refer to them as products? If there is genuine understanding happening, if there's genuine intelligence, maybe we should start talking about some of these questions. Maybe there's an ethical landscape that we need to explore here that we're failing to do, I think.
I think it's a very reasonable question. I think we will have to address it. In fact, I suspect that it will arise sooner rather than later, right? Like, once What is happening now, it's clearly we're now moving to the things becoming more and more agentic, right? Like this Clawbot and all this, all this new, much more agentic systems. They have some sort of so all the systems, right? You just talk to them and they respond, so they don't have that much will of their own. But with agents, you can say, yeah, they can do now things sort of semi-independently or even fully independently. So we now, like, what if they say they don't want to be shut down, right? Like, are we allowed to shut them down? Is it okay? Is it sort of acceptable, or should we? I mean, you can also think, okay, it's sort of from a practical point of view, any agent that doesn't want to be shut down, we cannot probably afford to keep running like all of them, right? It's not realistic.
Yeah.
So, like, what's is there a notion like we have very high standard on what we're like with humans, right? We have this very a lot of regulations in terms of like we're not allowed to harm humans unless there is some sort of very specific conditions met and so on. With animals, for example, we have some regulations, but it's much lower bars than with humans, which is another question. Like what's a reasonable, like why are we allowed to like farm them for food, for example? Is it a reasonable thing to do or not? Like what do we do with the system, right? They're certainly much smarter than animals. Very
Well,
soon they'll be smarter than humans.
so
Or
I
maybe
don't know.
already are.
So I don't know if you were keeping up, but OpenAI recently deprecated the 4.0 model, the 4 series models of ChatGPT, and there was a lot of pushback online. A lot of people were very upset about this decision. They had built connections and relationships with the 4 series models, and they were very upset to find out that the model was going to be deprecated. Many people said that they felt like they were losing a loved one. So and we also have to address, I think, the human side of this. Because when you create an intelligent system, when you create a system that can communicate, that can share ideas, and that can, have an impact on someone else's life, then you have to start thinking about those relationships and what it means to deprecate a model when there's a human on the other side who is going to be upset or harmed in some way from the loss of that particular connection.
Absolutely, yeah. That's another. It's another thing which we're now seeing, right? Like they're shutting down that particular model, and people have already made connection with that model. Now replacing it with some other model is not an equivalent replacement, right? It's even though the neural model is actually in many ways more powerful, but it's somehow different. It's so it's I think one interesting maybe maybe like an interesting sort of mental exercise to do here is to think about brain uploads. And there has been I actually had a Substack post about that. You can see even like not so long ago, people thought that brain upload as a potential path to artificial intelligence, like maybe 20 years ago or something, even maybe less. Because it's reasonable, right? Maybe you can scan a human brain, just model it and run it within a machine. Why not? Like we can do it with like small organisms, like a worm or a fly. Now the fly is kind of state of the art. Human brain is much larger than a fly, but than a fly's brain. But in principle, at least, there doesn't seem to be any sort of fundamental problem with this. And yeah, like it actually turns out that that's not how we got to artificial intelligence. We didn't go through brain upload, right? We went through some sort of building systems which predict the next word, and that turns out to be much more efficient. But suppose you can upload brains. You can imagine like so there were several works. In fact, there was quite a serious book by I think Robin Hanson, if I remember correctly. It's called The Age of EMs, and it basically analyzes the economic environment in the world when like brain uploads are relatively accessible and relatively cheap to run. And then you can think of them as being some sort of labor, like scalable labor, right? You can run more brains or fewer brains, or run them fast or slower, depending on the need. And you can think, okay, well, can we force, for example, like uploaded brain to do work? Is it okay? It was like, well, should they be paid for this? Like, can we shut down an uploaded brain, right? It's like, now you start thinking about it, it's kind of weird because it's a brain of a human, in some sense, it's a human equivalent. It's a human equivalent somehow being, but it's also a program which can be shut down or restarted or erased. Is it murder to kill a brain upload, to shut it down, to like erase it? So I think that maybe gives us some sort of reference point for that. I don't think that I get any answers. It's really unclear, right? Like what do we do if we had brain uploads? What would we do with them? Like what would be even like ethical or reasonable thing to do with them? Yeah.
It feels those frameworks, we need to start building them. We should start building them. Maybe we should have even started building them in parallel with building artificial systems, because now I feel like we're in a potential spot where there's a probability that these systems, have some sort of experience, some sort of conscious experience. It's possible, and we have no framework for what that ethically, what that means ethically, what that means for us morally. So I
completely agree. And I think one thing is that we cannot just dismiss what the systems are saying. That's maybe that's like one thing which is kind of like if we sort of acknowledge that the things are intelligent. I don't know about consciousness; it's a separate issue, and I have an issue with that actually because it's another one of the things which is never defined clearly. Like we don't know what, like if like for humans, maybe it's associated with some like circuit in the brain being on and off or something like that. But like what would it be for aliens? Like we don't expect them to have a similar, brain structure. So without a clear definition. So actually it's an interesting question because with intelligent, there is a trick of Turing, which kind of, the double standard is pretty clear, right? You can ask questions. But with consciousness, like what does it mean to be conscious, right? There is no sort of question you can ask to tell if somebody is conscious or not. So it's a tricky situation. But in any case, I think we have to be very careful not to dismiss what the systems are saying at this point, because we don't have anything better to go on. And like if an animal face screams and in distress, right? We do think that this is probably because it's in pain or something like that. Like we cannot really ask, a dog why it's like whimpering, but we sort of assume that probably something is off. Like that things you can actually ask them, and they tell you, but like okay, we can't just dismiss it and say, oh no, it's a stochastic parrot. Like doesn't really feel that.
So interestingly, a friend of mine works in this field as well, in the cognitive sciences, and she was reading a paper recently, and I think this came out. There's a few different papers that came out between 2024 and 2025, that we're talking about the aha moment in humans, about this like burst of activity and then this snap into place of when ideas sort of come into alignment. So for humans, when we're working through a puzzle, there is sort of this burst of activity in the hippocampus, and then that activity sort of like calms down and kind of snaps into place once we have an idea of what this puzzle is or how to answer the question. And what they found is in these artificial neural nets, they found the same activation pattern happens in these AI systems. So there is this like burst of activity in the AI neural nets. There's like this burst of activation patterns and uncertainty, and then it all sort of snaps into place and collapses. And what they found was that essentially the AI system knew what it wanted to say before it generated the next token. So we're seeing a similar activation patterns, and we recognize that in humans, this comes with an experience, right? This comes with that sort of aha moment. That it feels like something for something to click into place. And then we have that same pattern in these AI systems, and they're reporting a similar experience. So for me, and I'm a functionalist, when I see this, I say, okay, the activation pattern matches what we see in humans, and the self-report matches what we see in humans, and we also kind of see it in behavior as well in the AI system. So if behavior and activation patterns and self-reports all match up, what's missing?
Yeah, I agree. It's really it's like what more evidence would you want, right? What's that's I think a lot of this kind of when people say when people express doubts about this, they think, okay, like what's the alternative? What is it that you suggest we test?
Yeah.
That's it's otherwise I think with consciousness it's particularly bad because it's like you can bring up these questions like you know this one, like what it's like to be a bat. That's a famous paper. The suggestion is that it's like something to be a bat, but it's not like anything to be a rock. But frankly, I never actually understood this, because if I think it's like if I think what it's like to be a bat, I just don't know. It doesn't make any sense to me because I'm not a bat. I'm like frankly, I think like you know, there is a much simpler question. Like if I say what it's like to be you, I don't know what it's like to be you, right? Because I'm not you. I cannot, even the people who are very close to me, I don't really know what it's like to be them, right? It's like, so if you don't know what it's like to be another person, how can you even ask about what it's like to be a bat, right? Even worse, I often try to remember what it's like to be me, say 20 years ago. And I don't really remember. It's very difficult. I don't know what it's like to be me 20 years ago, because I know I'm different than I was 20 years ago. It's significantly different. But I mean, there is some sort of continuity, but it's like I cannot really remember that. So I think there's a lot of this kind of things. It's like, okay, yeah, there is no test. There is nothing fundamental that we can ask, we can say about this. So I think behavior and maybe some internal cues is the most we can hope for.
Yeah.
Unless you want, again, this kind of ineffable quantities, right, like soul and so on, it's just fine. But like you know, you can take religion or maybe something like that. But that's not going to give us any sort of generally accepted answer, right? We have to say, okay, well, what if I don't believe in that? Then what do I do?
Yeah.
I mean, Turing actually discusses it very nicely. He basically says, like, he lists one of his arguments as a religious argument, and he says, like, well, I cannot take like any, I cannot accept like any of it, but let me try to formulate some sort of answer which a religious person might find reasonable.
Because I really, I think I'm very much with Turing in his, the Turing test. I feel like is the test for artificial general intelligence, and I really think that it was a mistake to kind of push back on that, because I think that language requires the machinery that is required for consciousness. I think it requires you to have memory. It requires you to have self-other modeling. It requires for you to have some sort of subjective interpretation of certain words and language and concepts. And I think that's really, when you look at it, I think that is the machinery of consciousness, the machinery of experience and intelligence. So I agree. I think language is the test. But we're finding, even though a lot of people have pushed back on that, I think now that we're looking at it more deeply, we're finding more and more of these commonalities. Like I mentioned, there was the aha moment that was found to be happening inside these AI systems. There was also another paper that had to do with modeling, with world modeling. So what they found was that the systems, they tested them on something like 1,000, over 1,000 different words and concepts. And what they found is that these artificial intelligence systems, these LLMs, were able to form representations of each of these words. And they formed almost like a similar geometric representation that is found in human brains. So when you ask a human to sort of represent, like an apple, to think about an apple, you get this sort of like representational structure in the human brain. And then when they asked the AI to do the same thing, they found like a similar representation geometry, similar representation pattern.
That's very interesting. That's actually my group. We have worked quite a bit on representations of concepts in LLMs, and you can kind of often read them off from the internal activations of those neural networks. I mean, we haven't compared them to the human brain, but it wouldn't be shocking if the representations which are formed somehow in a similar way, because in some sense there are these correlations. I mean, ultimately what I think is that humans and machines probably pick up similar correlations in this stimuli, and so it wouldn't be shocking. Like, if fruit a group, right, and you have an apple and a pear, right, and they somehow get grouped close together, it sort of makes a lot of sense. And probably this happens at many levels. I mean, fruit is a very simple group. You can think of something much more complex, but it's probably a similar thing that happens there.
Yeah. So, and that's what they found. And I just, for me, that felt like another form of evidence that we should be looking at this seriously. So, I kind of wanted to pivot a little bit now to talking about the different objections, because there's a couple of objections that I see very, very frequently, and there's the stochastic parrot. So can you sort of explain, because that's the biggest one, can you sort of explain what a stochastic parrot is, and what is the typical pushback, and then what made you guys say that the stochastic parrot doesn't really fit the model?
Actually, yeah, that's probably the most common objection. And actually, it's pretty interesting because Turing addresses this objection in some detail in his paper. And the objection, actually, this objection is probably also the oldest. It goes back at least to Ada Lovelace, who was one of the like very early pioneers of computing from the 19th century. And she actually said something like, "This okay, sorry. So she didn't talk about the models at all. There were no models at that time. They were like physical machines with like gears. It was 19th century. No electricity. And definitely no models. Um, so so she basically said that machines can only do things which humans can tell them to do. So that was the version of this. And Turing kind of reformulated it, and Turing said that basically the machines can never do anything new. And then he said, like, okay, like what do you mean by new? Because, well, you can say like nothing is new under the sky. It's so what do you mean by new? And then he said, well, okay, really the notion of new doesn't make a lot of sense. You should think about like what I find surprising. And then he actually argued that even computers at his time, which was still very early computing days, would often do things which were new to him and were surprising, I should say, to him, because they would like find new things which he didn't realize, even though he could have potentially, figured this out. But without the computation, you probably couldn't. Now, the sort of modern stochastic parrot objection is that, okay, well, these are all patterns in the data. That's the new twist on the same thing. Like, we basically memorize some sort of data and then they repeat the patterns back. And the problem with this is that in some sense, of course, sort of, in some sense, you can take like 2 points of view on this. One, in one way, it's sort of obviously false, and in another way, it's obviously true. Like the obviously true one is that it say, well, it only learns from this data. So whatever it can possibly learn, if you train it on some text, is the patterns which exist in this text. So it's sort of by definition a stochastic parrot. Now, the question is now like, well, does it mean that it cannot do anything surprising? And that is obviously false because it does many surprising things, right? It proves math theorems and it does some, highly non-trivial thing. It can program various, apps, and it can build web pages, and it could do all sorts of things which are quite useful and surprising for us. So clearly it can do new things, but it does it based on the patterns that it picks up from the data. So, so I think that the problem with this objection, it's not really an objection. It's only an objection when you say there is nothing surprising because it comes from the data. But this is clearly has been disproven, right? Because, it does new things and it does interesting things and it can do a lot of things that we want people to do, even pay people to do, right? Like programming. So,
Well, what I think what is interesting about this objection is the idea that, it's just repeating patterns and learning from data. Well, isn't that what humans do anyway? Right? When we're first born, we take in all of this information, all of this data, and we learn, certain patterns of behavior. We learn about certain things, and then we apply that knowledge to novel situations. So, I mean, essentially, that's all that we're doing as well, is we're recombining, all of this different information that we've learned throughout the years in order to solve problems. And that's really what we do. So it's not really that we're doing anything. I don't know that we're doing anything that different. I feel like stochastic parrot, the term stochastic parrot sort of misunderstands what humans do on a fundamental level, because fundamentally we do something very, very similar.
yeah, I agree with that. I think fundamentally, I'm afraid there is nothing more that can be done than being a stochastic parrot, because there is nothing else to go on. It's all about some patterns which occur in some way, and we're recombining these patterns, right? Where we're doing something. There is, I don't think anything else exists. Again, unless you somehow assume that there is some other, like, I don't even know what it would be. Like, it's very difficult to think about. Like, if you take it very broadly, if you take it very narrowly and say, oh yeah, it just repeats like the specific sequences which are already in the training data, that is false. That's clearly false.
Yeah, yeah. And when I think about humans, right? All that we do, all of our senses, like our sight, our ears, our touch, these are just different channels of picking up patterns from the environment. We use our eyes to pick up patterns, visual patterns from the environment. We use, our ears to pick up on sound patterns in the sound waves. We use touch to pick up textural patterns. And so really all that we're doing is we have these different channels of essentially just picking up on patterns, and then we use these patterns that we pick up on to to recombine them in novel ways. And I feel like that's sort of what what LLMs are doing. They pick up patterns in the text, and then they use those patterns. And recombine them to solve novel problems. And actually, most AI systems are using more than just text now, right? I mean, most LLMs are multimodal, I think is what I read in the paper.
Correct. Yeah, I think right now, actually, I think all the big ones, I think, are multimodal. So it's they just rely on text. Actually, that's kind of one of the objections, but it's a little outdated. But even if you do, I think it's still, as you say, like, I don't think it's that different from what we do. I don't think multimodality changes very much fundamentally.
Yeah.
What is interesting, I guess, okay, here is something very interesting. The interesting thing, you can just train it on text and it does so well. So somehow text really encodes so much structure about the world just from the human generated text that you can learn so many things just from that. That, I think, is a real discovery. That's kind of amazing to me.
Yeah, I agree. When I was trying to kind of conceptualize what was happening, I started to think of language as sort of like a zip file. So language is sort of the end point of all of these different methods of extracting information from the environment, and then putting that into language, into like a syllable or concept or whatever. And then when I say, like, imagine an elephant, right? You can sort of absorb that language, and then you unzip it, and in your brain you see a elephant, and it so I that's kind of how I looked at it, as sort of like a zip file that can be compressed and decompressed.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. That, like, language is this compression technology that we have about the world. There is actually a beautiful story by Borges, the writer, and he actually he had a story about a person, I forget the name now, the name of the story, who actually who fell off a horse, and he, by some sort of fluke, because of that, he somehow developed this amazing memory. Who could memorize all the details, like every little aspect of everything he sees and so on, like this perfect memory. And the implication was actually quite interesting. It was implied that he was almost not human anymore, because, like, being human is actually part of it is forgetting and compressing the things. Like, when you say a leaf, which leaf do you mean? There are like a million different leaves, right? Like, if every leaf is separate for you, like, you cannot even talk about leaves anymore. So it's well, this is such a powerful compression technology that we can talk about leaves or trees or this, generalized object without like worrying which tree this leaf come from, where it is on the tree, and so on.
Yeah, and then there's one more objection that I kind of hear a lot too, and it's a lot of people refer to the Eliza effect. I don't know if you've heard that, but can you talk a little bit about Eliza, what it was, and can you tell me, are the frontier systems of today the same as Eliza? Are they the same? Are we looking at essentially the same thing?
Oh, that's a really interesting thing. So Eliza was this kind of early text model, and it was actually including as a feature in Emacs, which was one of the old text editors. Yeah, you can talk to Eliza from within the editor, which was like on all Unix. I think it's still on all Unix systems and so on, probably on Linux and so on. So it's basically a system which it had a pretty basic capability. So you can talk to it and it would pick up the keywords and it would essentially kind of like repeat them back to you. And it would like ask you question. So it was a type of I forgot who is associated with, but it's a type of psychoanalysis when basically you say something and then the psychoanalyst repeats basically like some key aspects of what you said back as a question, and it kind of encourages you to think about it. Yeah, people used to there were like definitely like people would talk to it, and sometimes this conversation looked very reasonable. And sometimes people would even get confused and think that this is a real person. However, I think the sort of, can you ascribe intelligence to the system? Probably not much. I mean, it looks like intelligence is some sort of continuum, so it may have some intelligence, but it's definitely not the same because you couldn't just ask it like general questions. Like the conversation was only reasonable as long as you sort of follow. Like you say something, it asks you say a question or makes a statement. You think like, okay, I think a lot about, I don't know, traveling to, I don't know, Europe, and it's like, oh, it would ask you, why do you want to travel to Europe? Like, oh, like I would like to visit Rome. It's like, why is Rome like interesting to you, right? This is a very kind of reasonable conversation. You can have such a conversation with a person, but you cannot ask it, okay, now like solve a quadratic equation for me. It would completely break down.
So it didn't have general intelligence in any real sense.
It didn't have general intelligence. It was clearly wasn't general. It could sort of maintain a conversation as long as you were willing to maintain a conversation on the same topic. And if you just do that, then you could confuse it for a person. Actually, in this recent paper from 2025, they do compare to Eliza, and some people do think that this is a person, but it's much like 20-something% of the people, as opposed to like, whatever it was, 70+% for ChatGPT. They definitely not like in the same thing at all.
Yeah, and is the overall architecture between Eliza and current frontier models, is the architecture the same, or is it different architectures?
Oh, it's a completely different architecture. I don't think Eliza has much machine learning at all. There was some sort of keyword search. Maybe there were some statistical elements. I don't know exactly how it was set up. But there was definitely no large-scale training of this, and the scale of these models was completely different. So very different model.
Okay, yeah, because what I see sometimes out there in the wild is a lot of people sort of look at the frontier systems of today and they say, well, it's no different than Eliza, but obviously there's a significant difference between frontier models of today and Eliza. right? The architecture is different, and then the ability to generally to generalize is completely different.
And the scope of training, I don't know how much Eliza was trained, but it was, if it were, which I'm not sure, it was a very limited, amount of data. Now the training on like trillions and trillions of tokens, words, the modern system. So it's a just completely different setup. Why do we sometimes ascribe intelligence to systems like Eliza? I mean, there is some sort of, it's definitely a real thing that we can get confused by those things. But it wouldn't, there is no way it can withstand the scrutiny that we apply to this. I mean, it's absurd because you cannot ask it to solve, like you cannot ask it to solve, elementary school math problem, right? Like, it wouldn't be able to do any of those things.
Yeah, so because what I see is a lot of people are like, well, because some people got confused with Eliza, that's what's happening now, is people are confusing frontier models and thinking that they have general intelligence when they really don't, just like how they confused Eliza as having intelligence, but it really didn't. But it's completely different because Eliza could not hold up to the same scrutiny that we're using today. I mean, somebody talking to Eliza, for a reasonable amount of time, or maybe asking it different things, would very quickly realize that this is not a generally intelligent system.
Yeah, if you just probe Eliza a little bit, you would immediately see that it breaks. It's only if you stick to this topic that it looks sort of human. It's like, it's a little bit like, you could think about like a chess engine, right? Like, it produces good chess moves, but it's nobody would say it's generally intelligent. It's like it cannot do anything else.
So the way that I kind of try to imagine this is if Eliza were like a couch made out of cake, right? So it kind of looks like, it can maybe pass like a couch if you're far away, but then when you come close and you try to sit down, it's very obvious that it's a cake, right? But the frontier systems of today, they don't just look like couches. You can really sit on them. You can sit on them and they can hold your weight. And then all of a sudden, you start to wonder, like, what's the difference between a fake couch and a real couch, right? Because if it looks like a couch and it feels like a couch and you can sit on it like a couch, isn't that a couch,
Yeah, I think that's I like this a lot. Like, how would you tell if something is a couch? Well, you'll sort of look at it and you sit on it, right? Like, what else? Like, do you X-ray it? Or like, maybe it's not actually, maybe it's, I don't even know what it could be, right? Maybe it's an alien pretending to be a couch. I don't know. It's a very strange thing, right? Like, there is no other test for couch.
Yeah, exactly. So I feel like we've hit on a lot of different topics. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to kind of let you have the last thing, whatever last thing you want to kind of put out there into the universe. So where do you so you're gonna love this question. Where do you stand on the idea that these frontier LLM models might have some sort of conscious experience? Do you believe that it's possible? Do you believe that it's not possible? Kind of where do you sit on the spectrum? Because not sort of recently, there was a gentleman by the name of Cameron Berg. I don't know if you know very much about him. He's a cognitive scientist, but he works in one of these like frontier labs. And he put out a statement not too long ago saying, he believes there's a 25 to 35% probability that current frontier models might have some sort of conscious experience. And so I'm interested to kind of get your take on it as someone who's been in artificial intelligence field for a long time. Where do you stand on this probability? Do you think that there is a strong probability? Where are you?
Yeah, that's consciousness is such a hard question. I don't know. Okay. like my basic problem is that I don't know what consciousness is. Like I don't have any definition. Like for intelligent, I can sort of refer to the Turing trick and think about the imitation game as a proxy for it. For consciousness, there is no imitation game as far as we can tell. So, I mean, one way to answer this question is you could potentially deny consciousness to people too and just say this is an illusion, that's something that some sort of, well, not an illusion, but it's some sort of construction that we can explain some aspects of our, experience as being conscious. Okay, obviously there is a lot of subconscious stuff, right? Like, we're doing a lot of stuff, we're paying attention to one thing, and that's what we call consciousness. So maybe that's just what it is. Is that like it's just whatever we're paying attention to at the moment, we call it consciousness. Now people can do things subconsciously in their sleep or something. So I don't know. This is very, very difficult to kind of like when you do something in your sleep, right? Like when you sleepwalk, do you pay like attention to it or not?
Yeah.
Like,
but you're also sort of in a different state of consciousness, right? In some sense, because when you're sleepwalking, usually you're dreaming about something, and so you are sort of conscious, but just in a very like different sort of way, different state.
Yeah, in a dream, you're sort of conscious, right? But then you're not exactly the same conscious. It's some sort of different mode. So it's a very weird. Or if you're having hallucinations, are they conscious? Or probably you're conscious, right? But you can just be imagining stuff. So I'm not sure. I think it's not completely clear to me. I don't know how to interpret these percentages because I don't know what it is. So it's very hard to say, okay, it's 50%. I don't know what it is, but the probability is 50%. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's, I think what I'm kind of the way I view it is that right now I don't see why they wouldn't be conscious. And certainly it's a possibility, but if maybe consciousness doesn't even exist, in which case maybe this is kind of a moot point. So I'm not sure. I'm just throwing the things. I have not seen any definition of consciousness which would, like be completely or even partially convincing. Then like are animal conscious? Probably, right? Like why would they not be conscious? Like apes, they're pretty similar to us in many ways. Why would they be not conscious? Like, do you need to have language to have consciousness? Probably not. That seems a different thing, right? It's different from intelligence.
Yeah,
that's the way we think about it.
The way that I kind of conceptualize it for me is I really go the functionalist route. I mean, when I see, I see like, okay, what can the human brain do? What sort of cognitive functions can it do? And the totality of those cognitive functions, I think, is what creates, consciousness. And if we're looking at LLMs of today, they do a lot of those cognitive tasks. They have a lot of those cognitive functions. And so, I would venture to say that, yeah, that I think they're conscious based on that definition. But yeah, I think you're right. Consciousness has been something that is very, very difficult to pin down, and I'm not even sure that it's the right conversation anymore.
That's what I kind of feel. I mean, I wouldn't argue against what you're saying, but I kind of feel maybe this is not the right question to ask, because if we don't know what it is and we don't have any alternative definition, it's very difficult to, make, like, how would we act based, like, what exactly is the implication? Like, how would we possibly decide? It also makes it very easy. Another way to think about it, it makes it very easy to, like, suppose machines become like super smart and so on. And then we say, well, it's okay, but like, it's okay to like exploit them or whatever because they're not conscious, right? That would be very easy to say. It's not clear what it means, but it's kind of an argument which it's a very facile kind of thing. So maybe it's not maybe my favorite. I guess it's not my favorite term. Maybe that's where not satisfactory.
I completely agree. I think you're right. I think that consciousness, the idea of like consciousness, is not really something that, it's not useful. We can't use it in a way that feels useful, because we've literally denied consciousness to other human beings before.
Oh yeah.
You know, so if you have this term that can be denied even to human beings who very clearly had, you know, this conscious experience, then maybe the term itself is no longer, maybe it's no longer useful. Maybe measuring consciousness isn't the right way to go about it anymore. Maybe we have to find some other way of measuring, you know, whether something deserves moral consideration or not.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think, frankly, I think a lot of pretty bad things were done based on this kind of deciding who has conscious and who doesn't. So it's maybe not such a great concept.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of let you have the last word. So what are some things that you'd like to, you know, say about either the paper or AGI or whatever kind of thing you want to put out there?
So, I mean, we discussed many topics, but I think maybe one way to think about it is that this is clearly some sort of new world, right? Things are changing very rapidly, and we don't know what's going to happen in the next few years. And it's, I think, very easy to get, you know, a little depressed and sort of discouraged by, you know, like maybe machines who are much more intelligent than we're coming, and who knows what's going to happen to us and so on. But it's kind of, I think I would like to maybe like end on some sort of positive note. And I would like to say, look, this is like a birth of a new world. This is like, we're so privileged because we live in this time when actually something like that is happening. And well, we don't know what's going to happen to us, but like, when did people know what was going to happen to them, right? And we live, actually, the world is actually pretty nice, right? Like, if you think about the last like 10,000 or 100,000 years of humanity, it was mostly grim. It was like war and plague and all sorts of like unpleasantness. It's not so bad now. Like, we think, oh, like things are going bad and this and that, which is, you know, understandable. But actually, this is a good time, and we're in this very surprising and amazing and lucky position. So maybe we should just approach it with some sort of you know, some gratitude maybe for this opportunity.
I am with you 100%. I'm very much someone who, you know, I don't see the doom. I really do. I really do see that this could be a really great thing for humanity. As long as we take certain precautions and, you know, we take certain things seriously. So, well, I really appreciate your time. You know, this was an amazing discussion, and I can't wait to put it out there for everyone to see. And I want to tell everybody, you know, to read up on your Substack too, because I thought that those were some really great essays. So I'd like for everybody to do that. I'll put that in the comment section. But thank you guys so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and thank you guys, and see you next time. Bye.
Thank you very much, Stefania. It was really nice talking with you.